Welcome to Andy's Garage. I'm Andy Phillips. Today I'm going to show you how to replace the fuel pump in your vehicle. So let's go ahead and get started. Now these are a couple examples of different kind of fuel sending units and fuel pumps that different cars will have. So I just wanted to kind of cover these because depending on your vehicle, it could be any one of these. So this one here, this actually came out of a Chrysler vehicle, but this right here is your complete assembly right here. So inside this, which is called your fuel sending unit, you have your fuel level float and the sensor right there. You also have your strainer. You have everything contained inside of this housing here. So that's your fuel pump in there. And then on the outside, you have your fuel filter and pressure regulator, which is also part of this. So when you replace that, you're doing all of that in one shot. So that makes it a lot easier. Next, we have this one here. Now, this one came out of a General Motors vehicle, similar to this one here, meaning that you have your fuel pump itself inside, and then here's your float right here for your fuel level. And then inside of this housing, you have the actual sensor. Now, this is an old one, so that's why it's all rusted. But so that's all that's contained in this one. And then here you have just the fuel pump itself. Now, in some older vehicles, you may have a fuel sending unit, kind of like a metal housing, as shown here. And in those cases, you can replace that, but that can be costly. These right here, you can get them fairly inexpensive if you get them aftermarket. But this is the fuel pump itself that's inside of these. So there's a couple things you can do when these go. You can either replace the entire assembly, which sometimes if you can get them cheap enough, it pays to do that. Or you can replace the fuel pump itself. Like for example, if you open this housing, you can replace the fuel pump inside of here if you wanted to do that. Or like I said, in other cases where you have the metal kind of fuel sending unit, which has, it's a little more of an open assembly, you can replace these just that itself by itself. So those are kind of the different kind of fuel pumps, so to speak, that you could be dealing with in your vehicle. So let's head over to a vehicle now and I'll show you how to remove the actual fuel tank and get to the fuel pump. Now, depending on your vehicle, the location of the fuel pump may be different. On some cars, and we'll get there in a minute and I'll show you some, they're located on the side of the fuel tank. So in those cases, you can just drop that side and you should be able to get to it. On other ones, unfortunately, it's on top. So you'll have to drop the entire fuel tank, slide it out so you can get to it to remove it and put the new one in. Now, the whole process in itself is not that much to it. It's the hassle of getting the fuel tank out. So what you want to do, here's a couple things to keep in mind. You want to try to run it as low as possible so that way you don't have that much weight from gasoline in the tank. So if you're able to, run it all the way to empty. If the car is obviously not in a position to be driven, see if you can pump it out if possible. Next thing you're going to need to do is we're going to have to remove the actual straps that hold the fuel tank in place. Some vehicles you also have a crossbar going underneath the frame there. Not all of them, but some of them have that as well. You'll have to remove that. You want to make sure you also have a hydraulic jack because that's good with a piece of blocking. You can put that under the fuel tank. So as you remove the straps and that support, that cross member, you can then lower the jack if you've got weight in the tank and lower it down slowly. And then we'll also have to be disconnecting the fuel lines. We'll also need to be also removing the fuel filler hose. You have to remove that as well. And then sometimes you'll have some electronic sensors that need to be removed as well. And then of course the fuel pump itself has the power going to that. That harness will also need to be disconnected. That's kind of the overview of the things that need to be taken off. So let's head underneath and get started. Now, before you go ahead and determine that your fuel pump is the cause of your problems and is what needs to be replaced, it's important that you diagnose it properly. If you want to see a video I did on how to properly diagnose a failing or faulty fuel pump, you can check it out via the link above. I'll also have it down in the description where I go through some techniques and methods that can kind of get you in the right direction that the fuel pump is definitely the cause. Now, the one that I have here, the vehicle that it's going in, and how we've determined that that was the problem, is that we're having random misfire on this particular vehicle. We're having a lot of symptoms that are indicative that is the fuel pump, which is covered in that video that I mentioned. And then also the main thing is that the fuel pressure is way below the recommended for this particular vehicle, which is the 5.3 liter V8. Now, another thing to keep in mind is the low fuel pressure and some of the other symptoms can also be indications that your fuel pressure regulator and fuel filter, different components of the fuel system could also be the problem. So it's important to diagnose them as well and kind of do a process of elimination before you wind up that it is the fuel pump itself, because this is kind of the most major uh, kind of task of the whole fuel system. So I'll have other videos down in the description where I show how to diagnose faulty fuel pressure regulator, fuel filter, things like that. So that way you can see it for yourself. So this is what we have here. So now I'm going to show you the items that you're going to need to complete this video, and we'll get started. These are the items that you're going to need in order to complete this task of removing your fuel pump. So first of all, you're going to need something like an oil pan or a bucket like I have here, something so when you disconnect the fuel lines, you don't have any gasoline dripping on you or on the street or the driveway. So it's always good to have that. Another thing you're going to need is some kind of a cloth. Also, eye protection is very important. You don't want any fuel getting in your eyes. Another thing that you're also going to need here, and this is all dependent on your vehicle, you're going to need a ratchet with the right sockets to remove the fuel straps. You are going to need a flathead screwdriver, so that way you can release any fuel pressure down around the fuel filter if you can't do it from the pump relay. You'll also need any kind of extensions that might be needed for the ratchet and the socket to get around those straps, so you can reach those if it's tucked further in. Different vehicles are different, so you'll need those. Another thing that you're also going to need is you're also going to obviously need your replacement fuel pump. And regardless of what you're doing, whether you're replacing the pump itself or the assembly, you'll need to get that. You also will need a hydraulic jack with also some kind of a blocking, so that way you can put that underneath the fuel pump, so you can support that when you remove the straps and any kind of crossbars, so that way you can lower it properly. So you want to make sure that you have that, definitely the blocking, because you don't want to puncture through right there. So these are the items that you'll need to complete this. If your vehicle has a side-mounted fuel pump, those are fairly easy. So all you have to do is raise the vehicle up on that side, slide underneath from the back, and just remove the strap of the fuel tank that is on the side of the fuel pump. So we can go ahead and release that here. Just take that one side off, let it drop a little bit, like as you can see there, just enough so you can get access to it. And then you'll remove the fuel lines and the harness to the fuel pump right off of the fuel pressure regulator and fuel filter if it's part of that whole assembly as shown here. And then all you'll have to do then is just take a rubber mallet with a flathead screwdriver, and then we can just go ahead and tap on that retainer ring that's holding that on, and just tap it counterclockwise so we can loosen it off. And then once that is off, then we can go ahead and take it off by hand, unscrew that, and then it's as simple as just pulling the fuel pump assembly out of the side of the fuel tank right there. And then we can pull that out. And then once you get your new one, slide it right back in the same way, tighten up the ring, raise the fuel tank, reconnect the fuel line, and then reconnect the harness for the fuel pump, and you're good to go on that one. Now on other vehicles like this one here, and on a lot of vehicles, we're going to actually have to get underneath and lower the actual fuel tank itself and slide it out. Now you want to make sure that you get your vehicle off the ground. What I have here is some Rhino ramps that I have it on. Highly recommend those. If you want to see a product review I did, you can do so via the link above, also down in the description. In addition to that, I also have jack stand as well. You always want to be safe when you're going under the vehicle. Coming underneath, let's just identify a few things. So coming in here from the back, what we have there is our filler hose going into the tank. And then right up above it there on the left of it, that harness, that is actually for the tank pressure sensor. So we'll have to disconnect that as well. And now let's come underneath and I'll show you the straps and the crossbar. We have our first strap located here. And with these, sometimes they can be tucked a little bit high up in there. Let's take a look up here and I'll show you what we're looking at. But if you look all the way up there, there's the bolt that's holding it in, and that's where the extension on the ratchet comes in handy, so you can get all the way up in there and loosen that strap. Then as we work our way down a little bit further, we have this crossbar here going across the frame. Now, I've noticed, at least in the cars I've dealt with, a lot of times General Motors vehicles have these. Chrysler vehicles, I haven't seen them on a lot of them or on other ones, but your car may have that. You'll definitely have to remove that as well. And then coming all the way down here to the other end, we have our other strap here holding this in place right here. So that would also need to be removed. Now you would remove the crossbar first and then support the fuel tank and then remove those straps. Now,
On this kind here, if you don't have the fuel pump, the fuel pressure regulator and filter housing on the fuel pump assembly, you'll have the fuel filter as seen here, which is housed separately outside of the fuel tank. Those lines will also need to be disconnected. So you'll have to release pressure right there, and then you can disconnect those lines, and then you'll see right above it you have the other lines that connect to the fuel lines going into the fuel pump assembly. Those will also need to be removed.
Next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and get the pressure out of the fuel lines. And for this video, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and start the vehicle. We're going to remove the fuel pump relay switch, let it empty itself out, and then we'll come underneath at the fuel filter at that Schrader valve and release any additional pressure from there as well. We'll put the pan underneath for that, and that way everything is clear so we can start disconnecting stuff. I'm not going to go through in detail. I'm just going to show quickly as we take care of those things, and then we'll regroup underneath to start getting the fuel tank out of there. Next, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the battery as well.
Depending on the type of connections that your fuel lines have, you may need to use a fuel line release tool in order to go ahead and disconnect those. But once you have them off, then you want to go just kind of drip them out a little bit, make sure you're wearing your eye protection, get those disconnected, and then we can work our way here onto the back side. And the next thing that you want to do is you want to come along to your fuel filler hose and go ahead and loosen any hose clamps, so that way we can remove that from the fuel tank. And that fuel filler hose is what connects to the fuel filler neck where you pump your gas, in case you want to kind of trace that to find that. But once you've got that off, some fuel tanks you may have different sensors, as is shown here, connected there around the back end. So go ahead and look for any different sensors or plugs connected, release those, and you can do so just by pretty much lifting up on them and then just releasing the locking clip right here. Slide those off, but you want to get those off of there so that way we can head back underneath to that support bar that goes across from the frames. We want to get ready to release that next. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and, if need be, you want to add a little bit of some penetrating oil on there. Let it sink in, because depending how long that's been on there, some of those bolts can be pretty tight. Let that sink in, and then you'll be able to remove that easily. And then we can drop that actual support bar there and get that off.
So I have the jack centered with the block right in the middle of the fuel tank. That way we still have access to both straps. We're just going to go ahead and support it. And then once the straps are off, we can gently lower it down and slide it out.
With the fuel tank supported by the hydraulic jack and the blocking, now we can go ahead and get our extension on the ratchet with the right socket. And we'll go ahead and start removing the straps here so we can get ready to actually lower the fuel tank itself. So we'll go ahead and loosen these up. May need to hit it with some penetrating oil, as I did here, to loosen them up a little bit. But once you've got them loosened up, then you can remove them by hand. Go ahead and slide that out of there. And the next thing you want to do, if possible, try to remove the straps if you can, because if you can get them out of the way, that makes it a lot easier for lowering the fuel tank itself. So you can go ahead and remove them, pull that out of there. Now, in the case of some of them, like this one here, if it's mounted further up, you want to make sure you've got it supported, but you want to go ahead and pull it out of the way. If you can get it out, go ahead and remove it. But in the case here, it's all the way up top. So the best thing that you can do here is just take that strap and gently kind of bend it out of the way a little bit, because you are going to need clearance for that fuel tank to drop down. And then now we can start lowering it here and just lower it slowly and bring it down, but not all the way down, because there are some harnesses up top that we also need to get to, like this one here in the back. We weren't able to get to it before with the fuel tank completely in place. So we've lowered it enough so we can now get up there, disconnect that and any other harnesses that you may have going into any other sensors that we weren't able to get to before. So I'm going to go ahead here. Same thing, just release that tab, pull that off, tuck it out of the way, so that way we have full clearance there.
Now with the fuel tank lowered a little bit, we can come on top and you can see there is our fuel pump assembly with that white plug right there being the harness. So we need to disconnect that before we fully lower it so we don't rip that. So let's go ahead and disconnect that, and then we can bring this thing out.
Now some fuel pumps have the harness as we see here on top, so that's easy. Just go ahead and disconnect it here with that clip. Go ahead and slide it out. Where other ones may have it externally as shown here, where the harness could be behind the firewall if you've got a rear engine, or it could also just be in the vicinity of the fuel tank itself. So you'll have to kind of trace that from the fuel pump to the harness and disconnect it this way as well. So now that that's done, we can go ahead and finish lowering the fuel tank all the way down. So we'll go ahead and lower that, and then we can pull the jack out of the way so we can slide that out of the side. There we go, slide that out. Now, we can go ahead and pull this out of the side if that's where the easier access is on your vehicle as shown here. Go ahead and grab that. We can pull it out the side just so we get enough clearance so that way we can get to the actual fuel pump itself. So we'll pull that out. Now on other vehicles, as we go ahead and show here, it might be easier to just pull it out from the back. So whatever's easier is where you want to pull it out. So in this case here, we can just pull it out of the back as we have more clearance, and then we have full access here to get to it on top and do what we need to do at that point. And as we said with this one, we just pulled it out just enough. As you can see, there's our fuel pump assembly right there on top. No need to pull the whole thing out, just so we get the full access that we need to complete it.
And this is our fuel pump here. You can see this thing is filthy. All this needs to be cleaned out. This looks terrible, definitely need to be replaced. Normally you want to kind of change these at around 75 to 100,000 miles to keep things functioning properly, but I'm going to go ahead and clean all this up. We're going to go ahead and disconnect these, and then we'll get this out, put the new one in. Now to clean this out, some people will hose it out or wipe it out. I'm just going to use a blower right here. We're going to blow that out and get all that debris out, because the last thing you want is that falling in there when you take the fuel pump out and then having an issue. Even though there is a strainer on the fuel pump sending unit and the assembly, you still don't want any kind of blockage. So we're going to go ahead and clean that off, and then we'll disconnect the lines and pop that out. Everything is nice and clean. As you saw, there was a ton of debris. Definitely nothing that you want falling in there. So very important that you clean that out. Let's disconnect these if we can even get them off. You can see they're pretty rusted on. Well, not rusted on, but pretty rusted, which could also be an issue. Sometimes when those things start to rust, you can get little pinholes that can jeopardize the pressure, which could also be some of the issue we're having. But let's go ahead and remove those.
As you disconnect the fuel lines from the actual sending unit, make sure you remove any of the little ring seals, the retainer clips. Go ahead and get all that off. If you need to save them for your new one, go ahead and save them. Sometimes they don't always come with the new fuel pump, but get all that stuff cleared out of the way.
Now to remove this ring that holds the fuel pump assembly in place, you're going to have to get just a flathead screwdriver. You have these little notches here. So, and I'll get a close-up, but basically you're going to be turning it counterclockwise. So we're going to go ahead and lodge it here, and then we're going to go ahead and take the hammer, and then we're going to bang it to release the ring. Now you have this little tab right here. You want to get that out of the way. That's kind of a little locking tab. So just take a flathead screwdriver and just slide that out of the way, because otherwise it's going to hold that from rotating. There we are. Take that off. And then here's our fuel pump.
Some vehicles may have this type of fuel pump assembly like we saw earlier in the video with the side mount, where basically all you have is just this plastic retainer ring here that you go ahead and knock off. And you'll see also this also has the fuel filter and pressure regulator unit all connected as part of that sending unit. But you can just hammer that off and pull that off as well to access the fuel pump assembly.
Lift that out. And you have this rubber gasket, which we're going to replace that as well. And here you go. That's our problem child. And it does have gas in it, so just be careful.
In the event that you were going to be replacing the fuel pump itself and not the whole assembly, what you want to do is with the assembly out, you're going to go ahead and find the actual harness connection for the power to the fuel pump itself and disconnect it from the fuel pump assembly where it connects to the main power. So we'll go ahead and pull that off to disconnect that. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to look for these little clips that hold the assembly together so we can slide the top off to get to the pump itself. So we'll just go ahead and take a flathead screwdriver and just slide it right in there so we can go ahead and press down those tabs, so that way we can then loosen up the assembly here, and then we'll be able to pull it out like that. And then exposing, there's the fuel pump itself that we're going to be replacing, and that's a pretty easy thing. We're just going to go ahead and slide it off of that line itself, and then just find the two electrical wires, pull those through so we can slide that out. Then you'll go ahead and get the new fuel pump together, get it all put together, and you're pretty much going to connect it the same way we pulled the old one out. So go ahead and slide it in place, connect the electric two wires to that as well, and then they will then feed all the way through to where they'll connect to the harness. That will then connect to the actual lid piece to the fuel pump assembly, and then you're ready to slide that assembly back together and put it all together so you can drop it into the fuel tank itself. Now, in the event that you have one of these old fuel sending units, the old where they're all open like this, similar process as well. You've got the fuel lines there that are all connected to it. And then as you come down, you'll see there's the fuel pump just in line there. You have the fuel line going right into the top of it. You have an electrical harness there in the back of it. So you would just disconnect the harness, disconnect it from the fuel line, connect the new one in, reconnect everything, and then you're ready to drop it into the fuel tank.
Okay, so we are ready to put the new one in. So what you're going to do first is you're going to put the fuel level float in first, and then this will just slide right in place. And you want to be careful of this harness, so just go in gently. And there we are.
Make sure you have it positioned so that way it's facing to connect directly to the lines, and that the plug is in the direction of the harness that it'll need to connect to.
So now we'll take the ring, slide it over these, and I leave these caps on until I'm done, that way no dirt, debris is getting in there. Slide that over, and you want to make sure that these line up right here, and it will lock in place. However, I gotta move this little clip again out of the way. There we are. So now what we're going to do this time is we're going to do it clockwise to get it to lock. And right under here. And you want to keep going until that little locking clip locks in place.
Remove the caps from the lines on the fuel pump assembly and go ahead and insert the fuel line retainer clips. Now we can go ahead and slide the fuel lines on, push them on until they fully lock and clip on there. And then we'll go ahead and do that. That one's good to go. And then we'll go ahead and do the other side as well. Make sure that they are securely on and clipped on. There we are.
Okay, so both lines are locked in place, nice and tight. I'm going to go ahead and put this back up. I'm not going to go explaining step by step. Pretty much you're just going to reverse the way we took it down. So I'm just going to kind of speed through that, and then we'll be back to prime it and get a fuel pressure test on it, and then hopefully wrap this up.
With the fuel tank still on the ground, you want to make any connections that you need to on the top of the tank itself. In this case here, we have the fuel sending unit, the plug that goes in for the harness. So you want to go ahead and connect that. So we'll go ahead and put that in place. And you want to make sure that it's completely locked on and secure before you raise anything. So go ahead and push that there. And here, there we go. This is completely in place at this point. So the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and jack it up, but not all the way. Just raise it up a little bit so we can get it up and we can make any connections there on the other side here with any of the harnesses that need to be done before we put it completely up, since we need access. So go ahead and make those connections as shown here. And go ahead, same thing as we did with the fuel pump, make sure that those are clipped in place, nice and locked and tight. Now we're going to raise the fuel tank all the way up in place, so that way we can then make the final connection, starting with the fuel filler hose. If you disconnected it from the fuel filler neck, you'll need to get that adjusted properly and tighten up those hose clamps. In this case here, we are connecting the fuel tank pressure sensor, but any other harnesses that you may have, get those all in place at this point. Make sure they're all secure. Now keep in mind the fuel tank is completely up and in place at this point. So the next thing that we're going to do is come around and we're going to go ahead and put the straps on. You're going to have the two straps, so you'll have one in the front and one in the back. You're going to go ahead and tighten all of those, get them properly tightened, and that way we can lower the jack once we have all these in place. And with the jack out of the way, then we can put that crossbar across the middle. Get that in place, tighten those bolts up accordingly. That way we are good to go. And now you're going to go ahead and attach all the fuel lines to the sending unit, as well as the fuel lines that were removed from the fuel filter itself.
Okay, so everything is now connected. Let's go ahead and reconnect the battery. We'll put the fuel pump relay back in, prime it a few times, then get a pressure reading and see how it looks, and then we'll start up the vehicle. Okay, well this pretty much wraps up this video on how to replace the fuel pump on your vehicle. I hope this video was informative for you and helped you out. Please send me any questions, comments. I would love to hear from you. And as always, I appreciate all the support. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.